It just yelled that at me. Did it yell that at you? Okay, okay. So what I want to start with is by we're going to take a look at the reading strategies that we use when we are reading. And we're going to start by reading in the English language arts, because that is sort of the canonical. Everyone assumes that reading in English is like reading is like reading is like reading. And so what I would love to do is I'm going to read this poem, and then can reread it to yourselves as much as you'd like. But what I'd like you to think about as you are looking at it once again is, what are the reading strategies that you are using to make sense of this text? All right, so whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. All right, so take about the next 2-3 minutes and just think about, how are you figuring out what this means? What are the reading strategies that you are using to figure this out?
I want to answer.
All right, take another, jot down your last thought. I'll say that. All right, so what do we do? How did we make sense of this? What were our strategies?
Well, I have to say, even though I've seen this before, I saw it again for the first time listening to you read it to me, and I was visualizing.
Visualizing. Okay, that's a really important reading strategy. Yes, we'll talk about that one. What were you visualizing?
Well, when it said there wasn't a farmhouse near, I'm seeing this field covered with snow and the snow coming down. And ahead of him, there's no footprints in the path, but behind him are the horse's footprints in the path.
Oh, cool. All right, so you're visualizing this scene.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that you're in the scene?
I feel like I'm on the horse with him.
Yeah, okay, cool. We'll come back to that, because visualizing is one of those strategies that gets used across content areas, but in different ways. Okay, what else? Wondering why the last line is repeated, says Rochelle. Yes, absolutely, right? Again, and I feel like repetition is like the ultimate craft tool of the poet, right? And that one of the discipline-specific ways in which English professors read, according to research, is that they look for repeated patterns. So the idea that there's actual direct repetition is meaningful. All right. So let's put our little analytical hats on. Why is that last line repeated? Literary device knowledge. Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. So repetition being one of those literary devices, but Chris names a bunch of better ones. Personification of the horse. Absolutely. Right. Synonyms between queer and weird. Nice. Yeah. When I was, repetition is to make it feel like time is going to go slow. Right. And I feel like, for me, the repetition of miles to go before I sleep, it's like it sort of is, it's on a literal level the first time. Like he's literally going to go miles and travel before he can sleep. But then the second one sort of brings it to this figurative level where it's like, it's a metaphor for our actual experience of life, right? Like it's a little depressing, but miles to go before I sleep. Like there's so much to do before I die, right?
So I'm also seeing, Brittany, how if you had clops, whatever it is that you would clop together for the rhythm, it would sound and feel like you're actually posting on a horse, you know, to begin with. That rhythm of da-da, you feel the horse's feet going, and you don't feel that when you read about armies fighting in social studies, you know, only when you're reading about horses in English do you feel the clomping of the horses.
Yes, and that was very disciplinarily astute of you, right? Because I think kids sometimes will notice the rhyme. They'll go, oh, it rhymes. But they don't take that extra step to say, why does it rhyme? Right? Like, how does that rhyme add to meaning? And what you just said absolutely did. The cadence as horse. I like that. Yeah. Okay.
You want to go on to the next one?
I want to ask one more question about this. So, which of these reading strategies are specific to English language arts? And then were there any reading strategies you used that you feel like are not specific to English language arts? Christy wants to say something.
Oh, she just muted herself.
No, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I was thinking, because I am an English teacher, when I see the way it's presented on the page, I know that it's a poem. So I look for specific techniques that are traditional with poetry. Like I start chunking by the stanzas, and that's going to be a English language arts specific strategy, and looking for the literary elements like the rhyming and the sound devices and that kind of stuff. That's going to be specific to poetry and English language arts.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. So I love it. So the idea of stanzas is discipline specific. I like that you brought up this idea of sound and rhyme as specific, not just discipline specific, but genre specific, right? Like within. I like that. Did anybody use punctuation to guide meaning making?
Say that again.
Like, did you pay attention to the punctuation specifically?
I'm looking at it now because I always wonder how to punctuate poetry.
Well, and it's really my favorite quotes from Oscar Wilde, and who knows? I don't know if he really said this, right? But I've read it on the internet, so it must be real. He said that I worked all morning and I changed a comma, right? And so the idea that in English language arts, the commas are extremely important, right? And so I have an example of that that's super fun with this poem. So the famous, the woods are lovely, comma, dark and deep, comma. So one edition of this printed it, the woods are lovely, comma, dark, comma, and deep. And Robert Frost was apoplectic, right? He lost his mind. He called people and started yelling. He came out of his New England snowy home and started yelling at publishers. And so I would ask you, why is that? As somebody, Rochelle says, yes, the punctuation was something I had not considered the first few times reading this, right? Yeah. But we know that in English language arts, like the punctuation, it's like people will dwell like, oh, should I do an M dash here or a semicolon? Right? And so in this example, why does it matter if there's a comma after dark? How does it change the meaning? I love this because I'm nerdy. I want to say it. Okay. So the wood, comma, dark, comma, and deep, that's a list, right? It's 3 things that the woods are. But if you have the woods are lovely, comma, dark and deep, then dark and deep describes the loveliness. That's how it's lovely. Yes. So,
see, I think comma, it helps with the alliteration too.
Because it doesn't split it up. That's interesting.
I learned something today.
Well, and I thought it was cool that Robert Frost called and yelled about it.
I know. I know.
And also crazy. Okay, so now let's read in a different discipline, and we're going to compare our strategies, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to actually like grab a piece of scratch paper and do this math. This math is
hide this so that how can I hide this hide self view so you can see all the words?
Oh, I think it's fine. But so yeah, this is grades like 2 through 6. So like everyone, we can do this math. Because sometimes I think I put this up here and people go, oh my gosh, no, I don't want to do math. It's 6 o'clock at night, right? So give it a shot. And then once you've done the math, the ultimate goal of this is to go back through and go, okay, what did I do here? How did I read this in order to make sense of it?
Oh.
All right, so don't forget the part that's actually important for this presentation, right? Which is after you figure out the math, then go back in and think, okay, how did I read it? What did I do to read this? Him. She came to an answer. Yeah, okay, let's start there. So who won, guys?
Abby and Bill.
Kim got Abby and Bill. Anybody else get Abby and Bill? I actually got Carla and Damien. Carla and Damien had 55, like you said, Kim. And then Abby and Bill, I had 48, not 58. Am I wrong? Did I miscalculate?
It could easily be.
Okay. But I don't know. but okay. So I think it was 48 to 55. But let's think about, like, how do we read it to figure it out? So Chris says, she's like, I didn't do the math, but I looked for names and how they were related. And I looked for numbers that were known. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, math gives me so much anxiety. LOL, I did try. And you know what's funny about that, or not funny, right? Is that finding in math is repeated, common, and often. That math is anxiety inducing for many, many adults and many, many students, right? And that actually does change what we need to do as teachers when we are introducing any kind of reading, is that we do need to be alive to the emotions, right, that are brought out as part of it. So actually poetry also induces a lot of anxiety for some people, so that we need to couch those things, right? And, you know, with poetry, we need to say there's not like one right answer. You know, and in math, there often is one right answer, right? But the thing that's important about math is that there's multiple solution strategies, so that there's not only one way to get it right.
I have to tell you, Brittany, when I got to number 4, I started going gibberish, 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 gibberish.
Well, right. And I mean, I had to really slow down at number 4. Like, I had to slow down so carefully. Carla scored more than 3 times the points scored by her partner. I had to read that 4 times probably. And then I see what Chris did here. She says, I used note-taking strategies. And you see, she, like, in the chat, did basically an equation, right? So I feel like there we have that, the note-taking, this sort of writing and reading interconnections that are really important. I've seen math teachers do this, video of math teachers, and it's fascinating because they are so adept at this, right? They're so much more capable readers of this, that they're just like, oh, the number one thing that I did is I got rid of the extra and I paid attention to what was relevant, right? And they were like, and the number one thing I did was zero in on where is the number that I can use. So they were like, I had to find Damien first because Damien gave me a number. And that was like the key that allowed me to unlock everything else. So they're reading this out of order. What happens if you read Robert Frost out of order? Nothing good, right? And so this is one of the problems with our sort of cultural assumption that we're going to only teach reading in English language arts, because then we're only teaching sort of narrative, right? We're like, oh, look for personification. That's what matters in reading. No, that is not going to be useful in this situation. And if we're not explicit about that, then our kids don't understand it. And I think one of the things that I always think about is, like, we learn by watching. That is like a deep human way of learning. But the thing is, when people are reading, they just look like this, or they look like this, right? They're not, you can't see it. Their actions don't look different. And so it's hidden from them, the things that more expert people are doing. So, you know, all the mathematicians are like, oh, why would I read these in order? Sure, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, but I don't need to read them in order. And that's because they know it. They understand how these tasks work, but kids don't, right? What other strategies did you guys use when you were reading this problem? Okay, math error in my brain. Yeah, it happens to us all. What else did you guys do?
I turned 1, 2, 3, 4 into equations.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
And then just solved the equations.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. The equation writing was central. Without it, I would have been really, really deeply lost in this. Rochelle says, I tend to cross out anything that is not relevant to the question. Absolutely. And we know that that's a disciplinary literacy skill in math, is that it's finding the most pertinent information. But let me ask you this. How are kids supposed to know what's relevant? How do they have that information?
We have to teach it.
Right. Which means I have to understand what do they have to understand in order to figure out what's relevant in math versus what's relevant in social studies? I'm serious, right? Christy, what do you think? Terminology. Rochelle says terminology. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I was thinking about a purpose for reading, like the purpose of a text in social studies, or a purpose in whatever the realistic purpose is. What's our purpose for reading, and what's its purpose for being there? Understanding that will help us understand what's relevant as we're going through it.
Absolutely. Yes. And over again, the research points to how we have to help kids set a purpose, right? That expert readers, no matter what they're reading, set a purpose, but that those purposes are different, right? When you are reading this, you are not really trying to learn, trying to figure out the characterization of Carla as a human being.
Right.
That information is not there. And if that's your purpose for reading, then that's not going to be useful to you. Right? And again, this is something that seems obvious to us because we have enough expertise in these areas to make sense of that. But that is not immediately obvious to kids. And especially kids who have been struggling with reading for a long time, they're going to bail out early, right? They're going to say, oh, I don't know it immediately, and I've never known it, and I've never been good at this, and I'm out. Right? So setting that purpose, that's a really good point. I wanted to go back to visualizing because I think it was Charlene said in the Robert Frost poem, I visualized, right? Visualization is also commonly something that is in the disciplinary literacy literature in mathematics. Like mathematicians visualize things. Did you guys visualize with this? Charlene says no. Chris says yes. What did you visualize, Chris?
Like I was seeing the basketballs in my head. Like I'm putting these here and these here. I know it sounds kind of crazy.
Visualize the teams. It was like, I was like, okay, who is on? I just need 2 teams in my brain. And once I had the teams, I was like, okay, Abby and Bill. And I give this presentation a lot. Like I've read this one many times, and it's still like every time I'm like, oh, who are the teams again? First paragraph. Did you read that? How'd you do it? Skim it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My math teachers who do this, they're like, oh, yeah, no. I barely read the first part. I go to the bottom. The question's always at the bottom. I read the bottom, figure out what the question is. And then I go back up to the top and skim until I find that relevant information. Right? Okay. First sentence I read like an announcer. Yes. College basketball playoffs are happening in the United States. So goofy. And now, okay, explain to me what your comment, your daughter is in 1st grade right now. Word problem images are fresh. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, what do you guys take away from this quick comparison of the math versus the ELA reading example? What do you notice about that? Oh, Dr. Kane, it's a very hard question for late at night. What do you How do you see these things? Like, what do you take away from this experience? I guess maybe what I should say is, what do you notice about reading?
I guess I read it like the mathematicians. I just immediately zeroed in on the 1, 2, 3, 4. And
Yeah.
that's something I've tried teaching my kids. I said, you have a narrative part, but once they start breaking it out in bullets, that should be like a neon sign. This is important. This is important.
Yeah. Okay. And when you say that, that makes me think of like academic genres, right? Like informational text will break things out like that. Absolutely. Yeah. Rochelle says there are similarities in reading between the two, but also many differences. And that, as Rochelle well knows, right, is absolutely a finding in the literature on reading across the content areas.
Yeah.
And let's see, Chris says annotating and modeling reading can be useful in all classrooms. Yes. And I love that you said the thing about modeling, because I just feel like it's such a great strategy. And I think sometimes teachers go either, like, well, what am I supposed to model? Right. And they don't realize, because we have what's called an expert novice blind spot. So once you've been doing something for a long time, like reading, you have a ton of expertise in it, but it's all implicit. You haven't thought about what your expertise is. And so modeling helps you to you're just talking through what you're doing and how you're thinking about it. Again, because kids are just seeing this, and that isn't helpful. So you're actually bringing it out and saying, oh, you know what? This is a math problem. I know that a lot of times the question is at the end. So I'm just going to read the question first because I want to think about what the question is. And then, I know that there's going to be some really important information in those bullet points, because I often put the important information there. So I'm going to pay super attention there. Okay. And then if it's me, the way I would model it is say, okay, I know what the question is. I'm still going to go up to the top because I'm anal and I have to read things in order. It drives me crazy. Right. And so I'm going to read it in order, but I know that not everything is of equal importance. So I'm going to look for the things that are most important. Right. And so I think to that point earlier, Kim, about, I don't have time for this, right? That modeling, you're going to set a purpose for reading, and then you can model, and that can be 3 minutes. It can be less than that, but it can be so central that it's going to just enable a lot more kids to participate straight away, which is a cool thing. Yeah. Okay. So I want to, Charlene, maybe we can go to the next slide. Oh, I want to come back to this one. Okay. And will you go to the next one really fast? Yeah, we'll talk about that. But I just want to draw attention to this because Rochelle said this smart thing about there are similarities in reading, but there are many differences too. So there's two kind of subfields, two different ways of looking at reading across the content areas. And one is called content area literacy, right? And that the focus there is really on, but what's the same across, right? So some of the things that they say are the same, that are reading strategies that kids use and humans use no matter what, are things like making connections, right? Generating questions, visualizing, making inferences, determining importance. We talked about that one a lot in the math one. Synthesizing, monitoring or fixing up comprehension. So those are sort of the things that keep coming up across. Now, the visualizing, for me, I'm like, yeah, mathematicians definitely visualize. ELA definitely visualizes, but we're visualizing different things for different reasons. So setting a purpose is something that we do no matter what we're reading. Okay, but then on the other side, right, we've got these discipline-specific things. And you guys, I felt like, particularly in the poetry, you were like, oh, yeah, like we're looking for personification. I'm looking at rhyme scheme. I'm looking at stanza, right? And so I just think these are cool. Like math, identify patterns and relationships. Science, we assume an objective stance. In social studies, we contextualize sources. Okay, so with that in mind, Charlene, will you go back to the social studies one?
Yes, I can. Hold on. I just have to do it a different way.
And you guys are going to see. All right. So here we go. This is the last like exercise one we're going to make you do here. But here we're kind of broadening the idea of what it means to read, right? Because there aren't that many words on this page. But how do we read it? How do you make sense of this text?
I recognize characters, or more correctly, caricatures of people.
Okay, so caricatures, which that's meaningful in a political cartoon, right?
Yes. You know, you could, if you've got some historical knowledge, you would know that there are certain countries that generally wear different colors. So you would know before you look at the chair, because the chair totally gives it away. But you know, the guy in red is British and the guy in blue is French.
So, okay. So already the reading is so wildly different, right, than what we've already done, because you're looking at caricature and you're looking at color as like a main means of understanding this text. And the color is not in like it is in literature, like red doesn't stand for anger here, right? Blue is not sorrow. It's nation states.
Right.
That's different too, right? And again, like if I'm a kid looking at this political cartoon, it is not immediately obvious that the colors are nationalities. Right. Okay. What else do you guys notice in here?
So I would have the kids start out, what are they doing? Don't worry about who it is. What are they doing?
Interesting. Okay. Why? I want to know why. That's great.
Because, you know, they should recognize the globe. Well, what are they doing to the globe? Oh, they're hacking it up. Okay.
I never saw it as a globe. Thank you for explaining this to me. Keep going. I'm learning.
Well, if you look close, you see that the guy in blue, he's carving up Europe. And the guy in red is interested in the oceans. Again, the red guy is Britain. The blue guy is France. If you really, you know, I said I've taught this a little bit, so I know the blue guy is Napoleon.
Right.
So, you know,
again, I didn't know, like, so I just found this political card. I was like, famous political cartoons, because I wanted a political cartoon for this, right?
Yeah.
And it comes up on my Google.
Yeah.
And I had this moment where I was like, I cannot read this, right? Like, I do not know what this is about. So then I had to go find an explanation of it. And then it, you know, it was like, oh, the blue guy is Napoleon. And I was like, oh, short man syndrome. Okay. And he's really small, right?
Yes.
Knowledge about Napoleon, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, got it. And so I was making connections, like they say we do across all reading. I was making, you know, text to world connections, but I don't have very many.
Another thing I would do is I would have them read across the top. Okay. And, you know, do you know of any countries that have this thing for plum pudding? And you might get a kid who like, wait a minute, isn't that in A Christmas Carol? Oh, yeah. And we can look that up and but Rochelle has got so much prior knowledge is needed, and that's the struggle that you have in social stuff, especially history.
Absolutely. Like these, and we know, like over and over again, research says that reading is supported the more background and prior knowledge kids have. Like we know that, right? And that this is really dependent on a lot of that. So that this would be a really great way to sort of support an understanding of Napoleon and, you know, the British and what that argument was like. But it's probably not a great like intro.
No.
Right? Because they're not going to be able to access this. I also just want to say I absolutely loved how you started with, and if you look at the chairs, it's obvious. And I was like,
no.
I was like, oh, good. I'm going to look at the chairs. Right?
But you've got the Scottish lion over there, and yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to say about this that's really important, right, is that you have different kids in your class with different interests and different things that they're drawn to. And some of your kids are going to be like, that is awesome. There's a Scottish, you know, lion hidden away in the back here and I can find it, which that's going to spark their interest in a way that sort of just a textbook reading about Napoleon is not. Right.
Exactly.
And I thought what you said about the plum pudding was really interesting too, because so here's my, you know, my background knowledge, my discipline. When I think of plum pudding, I think of like Charles Dickens and like Oliver Twist and like old things, old British things, right? And that brings up for me another idea, which is whenever we're reading in history, we need to contextualize. So we need to pay attention to time frame, right? And that word choice is very much influenced by time frame, right? So it's very unlikely that you're going to get a modern political cartoon about plum pudding. And that's another thing. Again, I think some of this to the expert reader feels obvious. Obviously, you know, there are old words that sound antiquated and that signals age, but they don't know that. Yeah. They're not thinking about that, right? And so discussions around how we're making meaning out of text can bring that out, which are excellent. All right. Anybody want to say anything else about this reading in social studies? Chris, I know that when you're studying this stuff, what are you thinking? She says there's French at the end. Yeah.
Ah, un petit simple.
Very good. I can't really see that, but yes. All right. So those are just, you know, multiple examples of reading.
Okay, so we went through this.
We already did this. Yep. And I mean, we only have not very many minutes left.
5 minutes left. Yeah. So we'll just.
Yeah. But I think that
this is where we're headed.
So when disciplinary literacy was new, right? And there's arguments about how different disciplinary and content area literacy really are. Like that debate is very much out there still. But sort of the initial work in this area was like, okay, there's sort of basic level literacy, right? You're decoding, you are breaking that code between sounds and symbols. You're doing phonemic awareness, you're doing phonics, like that kind of basic literacy. And then they were sort of thinking about there's this intermediate literacy, right? That there's things that we do across content areas. So that's, you know, setting a purpose for reading, it's making connections, visualizing, all those kind of things are sort of the middle. And then the idea was that there's disciplinary literacy, you know, later in high school, and that would be the focus. I think that increasingly there are more people saying the same thing, right? That there are findings that say, actually, no, we never let go of those intermediate ones, right? We're still using those. It's not like, oh, in middle school, we focus on intermediate literacy, and then in high school, we do disciplinary literacy. We're interweaving them all the time in order to make meaning. And so, you know, I feel like this is so true so often in learning. And as teachers, we think that we can like lockstep up, and it's, you know, and we're like, oh yeah, well, once I teach them how to set a purpose for reading, they'll know how to set a purpose for reading for all time. And we never have to do that ever again. And then we can do the next thing. But the reality is that setting a purpose for reading becomes more complicated depending on how complicated the work we're trying to do is. And so we don't stop learning how to set a purpose for reading. I mean, you know, when I was in grad school, they started handing me these articles and I was like, I have to relearn how to read because none of my strategies still work because all this stuff is far harder than anything I've ever done before. So I was still annotating text. Like that is a thing that I did all the time, but I had to do it differently because the texts were way harder. Right. And so, yeah, so they say that learning is like a spiral, and it is that we're spiraling and we're reusing the same things that we've learned before, but in new and more complicated ways. Right. And in the same way, it's not like a disciplinary literacy skill in mathematics is finding the relevant information. It's not like elementary school kids are not doing that. They are. Right? Like that math problem I gave you is for second graders. You have to find relevant information in there in order to do that math. So, right. So increasingly, people are sort of looking at this triangle as like, okay, that's a cool way to conceptualize it, but it's not this kind of tight linear progression. Right. And let's see. As a Spanish teacher who reteaches nouns daily. Yes, right. And actually, parts of speech are like intensely complicated if you really get into it. Yeah.
So I moved on to this because we don't have time for it, but I think it's a really good video that, is it Chris or Christy that's social studies person? Kim, look in the chat for this link because Brittany just thought it was a great example and we don't have time to share it, but be sure that you look at it on your own.
And also it leads to a website from the Annenberg Foundation. And if you've never seen it before, it has like videos from all the content areas and you can watch a video of what does it actually look like to teach this, which is so helpful. We can talk about it all day, but watching somebody do it is like, oh my gosh, okay.
So we're so close to the end, and I don't want y'all to miss Brittany's story of her volleyball coaching. It is so
you're funny.
This is how we're going to end it.
Well, and we can also, we can talk just a bit about the survey, but my story is early on in my teaching career, I was also a volleyball coach, and I was a 9th grade ELA teacher, and my co-coach was a 9th grade science teacher. And I had been working so hard to teach inferencing. I was like, I am rocking out right now teaching these kids how to read between the lines. I was like, it doesn't have to say it in the text. You take a guess about why people are doing what they're doing. And they were getting it. And I was so proud of myself. And my science teacher friend comes in and we have the same kids. And she flops down on the bench next to me and she is depressed. And she goes, I cannot get them to read. And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, they keep making stuff up that's not in the text. And it doesn't say that. And I was like, oh no, that I was teaching them, right? I was actively, and she was like, that's not at all what I want them to do. In science, I want them to make empirical observations about what they see.
I just laugh every time I hear that.
And I feel like that is something that we don't know as teachers we should be saying. Like we should be saying, this is how it is in English language arts. This is how knowledge is built here. And in science,